Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Really thankful that you're with us for this 4th of July edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We hope you have a great day celebrating with family and friends. 248 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, at least by the first folks who signed it. Just a couple years away now from 250 years from July 4th, 1776. And today we've got a brand new edition of things that we think are great about America. And so it could be serious, could be kind of middle of the road, could be more lighthearted. And so we'll each have 3 of these choices by the end of our podcast today. So Jim, where do you lead off?
So I decided to go with probably a topic near and dear to many people's hearts today, food. And not just like the sheer variety of American cuisine. I just, periodically you think about where we were a generation ago or even 2 generations ago, right? We've always had good food in this country, but it probably wasn't as widely accessible as it is. And there probably wasn't nearly as much variety as there was. You're probably going to have burgers and hot dogs at your, cookouts you have today. Maybe somebody, goes a little Australian, throws a little shrimp on the barbie, fish, chicken, all kinds of, good grilled stuff. A couple weeks ago, somebody on Twitter had pointed out an article from the New York Times in the mid 80s that said that Mexican food was a fad and that it was not going to catch on. Now, not only is there Mexican food probably in every country, in almost every community in America, maybe not everyone, like 80-some, 90-some%. It's not just Taco Bell. Like, you can get good Mexican food almost everywhere. You get good Chinese food almost everywhere. Sushi is much more widely available than it ever was before. We have more options for more good food than any other people in the history of the world. And generally it shows in our waistlines, and that has its own problems. But think about it, we are blessed to have not just the barbecue in Kansas City, where I was earlier this year, or barbecue down in the Carolinas, where I'm going to be a little later this year. The sheer variety of everything on your plate coming from Iowa, where I was earlier this year. This is kind of a travelogue episode of this. Just the sheer number of creative chefs we have, the sheer number of intermingling of different cultures and ideas. And, the fact that certain cuisine, like Tex-Mex, is literally about 2 different cuisines crashing into each other and mixing and creating some new whole. So we eat well in this country by and large, or at least many of us have the option to do it. We're blessed to have that option. And it's kind of one of those things very easy to take for granted. The idea that you can eat almost any food and you can find, there's a reason Boris Yeltsin was slack-jawed when he visited that supermarket in Houston with George H.W. Bush back then, when he kind of recognized the sheer variety and amount and possibilities of just a normal American supermarket, not even necessarily a high-end one. I'm sorry, Tucker Carlson, I'm just not convinced that the good supermarkets are found in Russia.
I've got 3, and I'm going to stick with the one that's closest to what you just said, so it'll flow well. I think you're right about that, Jim. I'm going to broaden it out a little bit to just, if you still do something really, really well and make people happy with the experience, you can succeed in this country. Sometimes we get frustrated when we see the amount of taxes or regulations, and certainly in some parts of the country, that is so burdensome that it makes success extremely difficult to accomplish. And that's why you see people moving with their feet to states that are freer. But if you do it well, especially in this internet age, when people are very happy to tell you what they like about an experience with a restaurant or a mechanic or whatever business they've dealt with, it's going to build. It's going to steamroll pretty quickly. Now, if you don't do well, that's going to steamroll pretty quickly as well. But the example that I think of is when Mrs. Columbus and I were on vacation down in South Carolina, an area you know well. And we've had over the years our restaurants down there that we go to. And a couple of years ago, we decided, you know what, let's try something different. So we were actually looking for Mexican food. That's what made me think of this. We found it had good ratings, and it's kind of this in a strip mall situation. It wasn't really an appetizing storefront. And so we're like, let's try it anyway. This was the most amazing burrito I've ever had in my life. First of all, it was so full. It was like spilling out. It was absolutely delicious. Mrs. Columbus loved everything that she had. And, it was just a little strip mall outfit, so there wasn't a lot of seating there. So we took it to a park just a couple blocks away, ate it there. We didn't necessarily love the strip mall ambiance, but we went back there the next year. It was just as good. It was just as good as we remembered. We hadn't imagined how good it was. It's just the case overall. America is still a land of opportunity. It's still a place you can succeed. And if you build the better mousetrap or the burrito, or you deal more honestly with your customers if you're a mechanic or a plumber or an electrician, and people see the value not only in your work but in your character, that is going to more often than not lead to success. It's going to require hard work, and sometimes that's not as valued as it once was in previous generations. But if you combine those qualities of skill, of character, and of busting your tail, there's a very good chance you're going to do well.
Excellent choice. Yes, and I do think that this might actually be like the most fundamental argument in our politics. And I think because it's not just political, it's kind of philosophical. It is, does hard work and determination eventually pay off? I think most of us would recognize that it's not an instant reaction. You don't suddenly work hard and then, I did some push-ups yesterday. Why am I not thin? That kind of, it may be a question of people developing the patience, having the tenacity to get back up when you have a setback and stuff like that. But I think most of us believe that over time, yes, your hard work and determination and playing by the rules does pay off. I understand why people get cynical, but I think it's a short step from there to, as Elizabeth Warren likes to say, the game is rigged and that you can't get ahead and that the only person who can help you is government. Because, government does a great job of helping people every time. Never screws up.
Never. Makes people more dependent is what it basically does. So that's where we start. All right, Jim, let's get on to our second choices now. What else do you see as great about America?
So I was thinking about our natural spaces, wildlife and wildlands and all that stuff. I was just thinking about I live in the suburbs. So it is, the good news is, as alluding to that previous martini, restaurants and strip malls and mini malls and stuff like that. And
they're everywhere.
Housing developments. It's not quite Spielbergian. It's not Levittown, but it's suburbia, right? But you don't get that far away. Just a couple weekends ago, both my teenagers were busy. My wife and I are like, what do we want to do? We'd been to Old Town. And we went to Kent Island, which is in the Chesapeake Bay, just past the Bay Bridge. You only do a little bit of traffic. It's like an hour and 10 minutes. And you just felt like you're in this completely different environment because you're on the bay. And there's a favorite restaurant we have there. And you feel almost like you're in a beach community or a boating community. And the water's beautiful. The weather's great. You can smell the salt air, even though I guess it's briny in the Chesapeake Bay. But, you can go back during COVID. One of the few good things came out of COVID because everything else is shut down. We went around to a lot of state parks, national parks, all kinds of places up and down the Potomac. And, we went hiking because it was the only thing you could do. We felt there's all these gorgeous places not too far from where we are. It's good for us, good for the kids. Sometimes in wintertime, you go to the Shenandoah Valley. Again, we're talking an hour and a half out of the city. You alluded to being down in Hilton Head, gone kayaking out there. You can get away and just feel like you are far from human civilization, not going that far. I've been blessed that the work that I do has me travel. That's why you get to see John Gabriel and Ines Stepman and all these, and Andy McCarthy and all these other folks sitting in for me. So everything from, getting to see the mountains of Colorado. Didn't get to do a lot of climbing or anything when I was out in the lab there recently. California. We make fun of California a lot, but there's no getting around the fact it's got gorgeous places. And, the nice thing is to be able to have, an hour or so away from your community, maybe worse if traffic is bad, and being able to go out and enjoy the great outdoors and enjoy redwoods and mountains and forests and coastline and all that stuff. Natural Review's cruise this year was to Alaska. So you go down the list, almost any place you want to go, there's a remarkable natural beauty. And it's interesting, you and I, we make fun of the climate change alarmists. We make fun of Greens on this show sometimes. But I think most conservatives are at their hearts conservationists. They appreciate. You want to find somebody who wants to preserve natural wildlands? Hunters. Right? People who go out, they want, that's where the animals live. They wanted to have habitats that are going to be enjoyable. And you can find measuring sticks in which America has gotten significantly better over the past generation on this. The smog over LA used to be, blot out the sky and all that stuff. So we have great natural resources, great natural lands. And I think it's, we do have this duty to preserve it for the next generation. And we really are blessed. And there are certain parts of this country that, certain countries that don't have that advantage. When I was over in Ukraine, there was this woman who pointed out that so a whole bunch of rivers flow into the Black Sea. Unsurprisingly, lots of, runoff from unexploded shells, dead bodies. War has terrible environmental consequences. This woman said, "I'm never swimming in the Black Sea again." Now, I heard that after I'd put my feet in the Black Sea down by Odessa, and I was less than thrilled to hear that, but I'm just kind of recognizing that, not everybody in the world has this, and we are just lucky to have it. I hope we make sure you do a good job of taking care of it so that my teenagers and their kids and their kids and their kids beyond them still get to enjoy it.
It's a beautiful country from coast to coast and a lot of variety in the type of physical features in this country we can appreciate. We did not coordinate subjects here, but this is the one that went in my mind. It's not specifically the physical landscape of America, that's certainly true, the historical opportunities to study as part of traveling around America. And so as my wife, school teacher before we had kids, and now an educator again, is fond of saying Virginia history is American history. And so when our kids hit their American history units, you go to Jamestown, and we went to Williamsburg, and Mount Vernon, of course, is right around the corner from us, and Monticello, and so many different things. And then we drive to the Midwest, and there's a bunch of presidents from Ohio. There's Gerald Ford from Michigan, and some others in Indiana, Lincoln in Illinois, of course, and on it goes. And so, it's not just presidential sites. There's other things you can visit as well along the way. And by and large, most of these places are really well done. Some of them have a ton of money. Mount Vernon is not hurting for money, so they have very, very fancy museums there. It actually fake snows when you're in the theater watching the movie about Valley Forge, and your seats shake in the auditorium, so it's a 4D experience. Not as much money, for example, at the Andrew Johnson Museum in Greenville, Tennessee. But nonetheless, you still learn. You can tour the house. You learn about his family. You visit grave sites. And I've always been fascinated by the presidents. And thankfully, my girls have kind of tacked onto that as well. And Mrs. Columbus, too. And just no matter where you go, there's always something interesting that took place there. Obviously, a lot of Civil War battlefields in our area as well. I mean, there's just a ton to learn. We were coming back from South Carolina last month when we were at the beach, stopped at a rest area, and there was a plaque there about the largest Civil War battle in the history of North Carolina that I had no idea about. So just fascinating to watch. So in some of these places, you got to watch the changing terminology depending on who's running the joint. It gets a little woke, but if you have a pretty good base of knowledge, you can fish those out pretty well and explain the differences to your kids. But America's got fascinating history in every single state. And if you got the time to explore it, I highly recommend that you do so, because you'll learn even more than you started with.
Greg, I'm just going to point out that, I feel lucky enough in where I live in Fairfax County that the kids do field trips to these important historical sites. And because they want parents to volunteer, I usually am like, tear off the Band-Aid all at once. I'll chaperone one of the field trips. Because one, at least I get to go visit to these cool places and go there with my kids. And also, like, I don't get asked to do the bake sale and all the other stuff that they traditionally ask parents to do. So I don't know about you, but I will always associate Jamestown, Gettysburg, and Williamsburg with not just the challenges that the early Americans faced. I will always associate them with 5th and 6th graders barfing on the bus. And if you think, like, each generation has their challenge. Sometimes you have the British trying to kill you. Sometimes you have smallpox. Sometimes you have all kinds of problems. But really, the barfing elementary school kids are an essential part of American history in my mind now. Listeners, we did not coordinate. So if you say, hey, why are Jim and Greg talking about such similar things? Don't they plan this? No, we don't.
No, we don't. And let me just say, as we wrap up this one, the Jim Garrity rule of field trips, the key is to come back with the same number of students you left with. Sometimes it's not the same kids, but as long as you have the same number, that's the key.
It is really just elementary school free agency. Look, you're always going to lose a few, but you're trying to pick up some good ones, and they got some skills, and you feel really good about them. So,
And your kid's on the bus, so
yes, that's the other reason I go, is that my kid won't get lost.
All right, Jim, as we wrap up here on our 4th of July special, what's your third thing that you're very grateful about to be an American, and what's great about America?
All right, in proof that you and I do not rehearse this and we don't coordinate it very well, my also has to do with history. I was thinking about our historical debates. And it's very easy to watch the old Jay Leno jaywalking segments or the modern equivalent of that. They show people pictures of the founding fathers. There are ignorant Americans. I don't think those Americans are necessarily representative. I think if somebody is walking down the street and says, yes, that's George Washington, yes, that's Alexander Hamilton, yes, that's Thomas Jefferson, that doesn't make for very interesting television. So my guess is that there are people who get it right and you just don't hear them. The same way I'm fairly certain the Tennessee Titans had some people in Nashville who knew what the team logos were and could identify them, but that doesn't make for a very funny video. So go to, I'd say, any Barnes & Noble, but really probably any bookstore, and look at the bestseller list and look at what's on the front table. Chances are there's a really good chance it's going to have either historical fiction or much more frequently historical nonfiction that will be front and center. And it can be Eric Larson, sometimes Doris Kearns Goodwin. David McCullough passed away, but he was always there. Victor Davis Hanson. There's no history is still a topic that fascinates us. History is still a topic that we like to read about, we like to write about, we like to argue about. And it is good that Americans are passionate about their history. It's good that we have these arguments. And I'm also going to point out, all of our Civil War reenactments are reenactments so far. We care about this stuff. We debate about this stuff. Should there be a Confederate flag? Should there be Confederate statues and all that stuff? But one is, I think it's actually better that we care than we don't care. And two, nobody really shoots at each other over this sort of thing anymore. Go to the former Yugoslavia, and that's not the case. People are still fighting over what happened in 1287 and things like that. So you're going to have. I think it's good that we are passionate about our past, but not too passionate about our past. I think in the eyes of the right storyteller, the right person, and almost anything can become really fascinating. If you'd said, hey, the most successful musical or in Broadway in a generation is going to be about the founding fathers and about the guy on the $10 bill, you can go and find the footage. Lin-Manuel Miranda does one of the opening raps at the White House during the Obama years, a couple of years before Hamilton opened. And Obama announces it. And, this Mr. Lin-Manuel Miranda is working on a musical about Alexander Hamilton. And there's this chuckle that goes through the crowd. Like, oh, that's going to be a hit. And of course it is. And what it is that, in the eyes of, with the right person, and sometimes, think about how many historical, again, sometimes exaggerated historical stories end up on the silver screen. And, sometimes accuracy, generally is the first casualty when Hollywood makes a war movie. But nonetheless, it's all good. I think it's a good thing because it gets people interested. It's the gateway drug. People may know that a couple of weeks ago a couple of months ago, I talked about how much I liked Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, which is British history, first commando mission in World War II by the British against the Nazis. And I still like the film. I still also say that it had more on-screen deaths of Nazis than actual Nazis killed in the war. But it did spur me to go buy the book by Damian Lewis. And the book it's not just like, oh, the book is better. You look at this and you're like, as good as the movie was, it didn't need to be so stylized. What happened in real life was every bit as fascinating. So I think it's good that we are a country that is passionate about our history. And I think it's okay for us to have arguments and debates. Was it right to drop the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Spoiler alert, yes. But this kind of recognition that we can look at our past history and say, oh, not everything we did was right. Or our founding fathers were not perfect and that they did make flaws and that there was, the fact that the rights guaranteed in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights when it was first enacted really only applied to a minority of Americans, and still recognize that was still a giant step forward for human freedom. That's worth something celebrating, while also recognizing we have to make sure that the same rights are applied to all Americans all across the country. So anyway, the point being is we are a country that is passionate about our history, and that is much better than being a country that is lethargic and ignorant and doesn't care about its history any longer.
No, I love going to these sites. Sometimes you get the person taking the tour who just wants to talk and see if they're smarter than the tour guide and that sort of thing. But ultimately, you end up learning and you meet some great people along the way. I'm going to just kind of jump off of that and talk about the contents of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, since we're celebrating the Declaration specifically today. But obviously, the Constitution is the guidebook, or is supposed to be, for our federal government in terms of our founders. And it's not very often that a government is founded by people who don't trust government. And so that is a great blessing for this country. And so right off the bat in the Declaration of Independence, our rights come from God. They don't come from man. They're life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness among them, among others. And so they said it right away that the just powers of the government are from the consent of the governed. The people are in charge. And then once you get to the Constitution, they spent that sweltering summer putting it together. And when they got to the end, it was like, oh, we left some stuff out. We got to do this thing. It's called the Bill of Rights. And so we did 10 amendments to the Constitution. And they'd promised to do it in order to get the thing ratified. But it really struck home, I think it was last year, but I can't remember exactly when Justin Trudeau went on his gun control push in Canada. And there just wasn't much Canadians could do about it. And there were people in Canada saying, oh, man, watch out for what you can say, watch out for owning guns. Boy, I wish we had what you had in America, because the Constitution has those safeguards in to protect the people. And so the foreknowledge, the foresight, And part of it's because of what they'd endured with the British, of course, that they put these amendments and the rest of the Constitution in place to limit the power, especially the federal government. It was genius. It has worked well for a very long time. And it's a system of rights that most others don't have. There's certain laws of freedom of speech and so forth in other countries. And we have our own fights over it in terms of what gets throttled, what gets muted, what gets so and forth on social media and so forth. But these are freedoms that are anchored really, really deep into our country. And for the people who want to take them away, they're going to have to fight a whole lot harder to try and threaten those. So very grateful to the founders for giving us the freedoms to carry on in a world that they probably wouldn't recognize today.
Greg, I say amen to everything you just said. I'm just going to observe, look, this is an election year. It's always better to have a good person at the head of your government than a bad person at the head of your government. You should try to avoid putting bad people at the head of your government. But if you have a good system of checks and balances, as laid out in the Constitution, the damage that a bad person can do at the head of government is dramatically less than it would be without those checks. So maybe we should keep the Constitution in place. Honor it, pay attention. In fact, what's the first thing we ask a president to do? I'm trying to remember. It's preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. So you probably should not treat it as optional, or any part of it as optional. Like, I preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, except the Second Amendment. That part's optional. Yeah, no, not the way it works.
If only the founders had somehow installed like a buzzer, so every time a president or a lawmaker does something to violate their oath, it just goes off.
I have, long subscribed, and that when you as a judge make a ruling, or I suppose a court, circuit court of judges, you make a ruling, and you get overruled at the Supreme Court 9-0, and you can't persuade one justice that you had a point, and that I think at minimum you should be required to wear the jersey or the shirt of your least favorite sports team to the next time you're behind the bench. That there should be maybe a dunce can, just something, maybe even just a T-shirt that says, "I made a decision that was overruled 9-0 at the Supreme." Because I'm not saying these people could never be judges anymore. I realize we'd lose a whole bunch of judges that way, but I kind of feel like there should be some consequence for. Yes, I really screwed up. My understanding of the Constitution is completely wrong, and I don't know what I was thinking. I might have a head injury, put me in concussion protocol. And I just think, like 4 justices on the Colorado Supreme Court, for example, would just go through just a tiny bit of professional humiliation, and just as deterrent for the next time when they're thinking, am I going to be able to persuade anybody on the Supreme Court? Not even Sotomayor? Wow, I'm really in deep doo-doo on that one. So, yes, I don't think it's too much to ask.
Yeah, when Thomas and Sotomayor both think you're crazy, that's
right. It's
a pretty good
at that
sign
point,
here.
You're a uniter, not a divider.
Maybe not your intention, but it is the result nonetheless. So, Jim, happy 4th of July to you, and see you again tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific 4th of July. Have a safe weekend. We'll see you tomorrow with another special edition of the 3 Martini Lunch. Then back to our usual fare on Monday with Chad Benson filling in for me with Jim.